All right, back with another one from the Stormlight Archives, Words of Radiance, Part 2. A lot is going on in Part 2. There's quite a few chapters packed into Part 2. So we got a lot of different things to think about and to cover, a lot of different character development. And then I will say the end of Part 2 came together in a way that was reminiscent of the way that the whole first book ended. You know, a lot of character arcs coming together, converging, a lot of big things happening, some big fights. So the end of Part 2 is pretty exciting, really well written, and looking forward to Part 3. But what do we have going on here? We've got all these different characters, keeping track of them all. Adolin and his plan with his father to duel different members of the kingdom and collect their shard blades as reward for winning these duels. And this fight that he has with Shallan is one of the scenes from Part 2 that really stood out in my memory. The way that he comes in and just absolutely dominates the fight. And then he has some, reflection afterwards, and they're starting to think, well, if I keep winning the fights in this way, no one's going to want to fight me. So then later on in Part 2, he tends to feign as though he's barely able to win, trying to entice others to take on these duels, increasing their hopes that they could possibly beat him. But Sadeas actually sees through this. So we see this duel with Adolin versus Shallan, and the way that he just comes out swinging and absolutely dominates them, to the point that the spectators are like, that's not really how it's supposed to go. It was a really good scene. In Kaladin's development, he's continuing to work as a bodyguard essentially for Dalinar, Adolin, Renarin and Elhokar, and he's doing his best. He's truly a hard worker, and you see that from his backstory with his father and a lot of the virtues and values that his father instilled into him, and his time as a soldier and his time as a bridgeman. He's just a true leader, and as such, he is our hero in this story in an archetypal sense. And so we continue to see that continually evolve. He's willing to sacrifice over and over again of himself. And you see some struggle he has in terms of his willingness to sacrifice others, but still comes in and says, look, the people that are still here, the bridgemen that have stood by your side, that's their decision. Don't take that away from them. So she reminds him that each person is able to make their own decisions, and that he's not just sacrificing his friends and his fellow soldiers, his fellow bridgemen for, the sake of his own values, but that they're playing their own part in this, and that he cannot take that away from them. That comes up particularly towards the end of Part 2, which we'll get to. And then we have Renarin. I think Renarin he's illustrating something for us in Part 2. He's been playing this role throughout the story so far, but it becomes even more clear. He is a symbol of potential. Renarin has a lot of latent ability, latent potential that has yet to come into fruition. But we see now that he gets his own shard plate and he begins his training as a soldier, he is more than happy to take on an archetype that we haven't talked about here before on the channel, and that is the archetype of the Fool. Typically, people hear that and they think that it carries a negative connotation, but it's not actually the case in its entirety. The archetype of the Fool is the willingness to be the novice, to take on a new challenge and to be new at something, a willingness to subvert one's own ego and embrace failure in the pursuit of success. And Renarin, with his new shard plate, embraces this archetype to the fullest. He's told to essentially go up on the roof and jump off. And this is symbolically a very clear, concrete depiction of this archetype of the Fool. This willingness to jump off and fall and land on the ground and pick yourself up again over and over again. It's very clear that Brandon Sanderson wrote this in there as an explicit example of this willingness to be new at something and to try again. And Renarin does this without reservation. And so it shows us the value of being able to set your own desire to be the best at all times, at all things aside, and say, look, I'm new at whatever this new endeavor is, and I'm willing to fail as many times as it takes for me to improve and to grow in this respect. Renarin shows us that as he embraces this archetype and as he serves as a symbol of potential in our story. We also have Shallan. A lot of different things going on with Shallan. Now that Jasnah's gone, I still hesitate to say that she's truly gone for good, but there has not been any hint that she's coming back. I just still hold reservations about that. We'll see. But Shallan is also serving as a symbol of potential. She's also showing us, she's serving as a symbol of a lot of repression as well. We're starting to get some further glimpses into her past, some ideas of what's going on and what has happened with her family. She's watched her mother be killed by her father. There are hints in the story so far that she actually killed her father, but it's still somewhat ambiguous. But the picture is starting to clear up for us as we're getting more flashbacks to her past. She clearly has a lot of potential, and she clearly has a yearning to learn as much as she can. Jasnah was serving as a teacher for her, a professor, and was teaching her how to apply herself and how to take her curiosity and apply it in a proper manner so that she's rigorous in her training and her pursuit of knowledge. Now that Jasnah's gone, we see that she is looking for someone new to latch onto, to identify with. And she comes across this new figure in the story, Tin, who, in contrast to Jasnah, who was all about the pursuit of truth, Tin, in a way, is the mirror here. And so we get the mirror image of Jasnah in terms of someone that Shallan is trying to identify with and latch onto and learn from. Tin, as opposed to Jasnah, is obsessed with deception, the opposite of the truth, lying and conning and stealing and tricking others. And we see that Shallan is all too quick to start to latch on to Tin as a potential new teacher to, in a way, fill Jasnah's place, but again, as her mirror. This isn't, self-evident to Shallan at the time, but I think that she begins to have some feelings, bubbling up from her subconscious about how this is not really who she wants to be. She doesn't want to follow Tin to that natural end because she's not entirely interested in just conning and tricking others, although she is learning more and more how to use her influence and how to, influence people around her to help her achieve her means. So it's somewhat Machiavellian in nature, but there's a balance to be had there, trying to figure out to what extent she should use those around her, to what extent she should deceive. And we see Tin come in to fill Jasnah's place. And before part 2 even comes to an end, we see that Shallan is shown that this path of deception only leads so far before it meets its natural conclusion. And we see that with Tin, who in fact was involved in the assassination of Jasnah and the attempted assassination of Shallan. So Tin tries to end Shallan there when they find that out from the span read, that Shallan is in fact the former ward of Jasnah, and Shallan does something unexpected and summons her own shard blade in order to save herself and kill Tin, which has me wondering, where did this shard blade come from and why has it not come up before? Why has she never used it before or even mentioned it before? Could be part of this repression. Could be a repressed memory, maybe only in this time of trauma where she's about to be killed by Tin is she able to remember that she even has that ability. I'm not sure, but I am sure that we'll learn more about that and where this is coming from. We also have King Elhokar, who continues to be the symbol of weakness at the top of the hierarchy of the kingdom. He's the king, but in juxtaposition to that, he's so weak of character. And that is in stark contrast to Dalinar, who, while not actually being the king, is at this point in the story serving the role of the king. So we have this dynamic going on. And then we get to the end of part 2 with Szeth finally appearing to try to take out Dalinar, and Kaladin and Szeth finally colliding. They both have this same ability to use Stormlight, and they come head to head. And this is where we finally get this very clear picture of how they are also essentially mirror images of each other. They share this ability, but Kaladin is pursuing honor, whereas Szeth is in denial. We see this denial when he realizes that Kaladin has this ability to bend Stormlight, and he says, no, this can't be. Have the Radiance returned. Kaladin, unsure exactly what this means, but can intuit that he should, in the moment, go along with it and say yes, says yes, they have returned. Szeth says, no, this can't be. They said I was truthless. This can't be right, and he runs off. I think about this some more, and I consider what is going on with Szeth. What is this symbol here? What's the symbology surrounding this? And I believe that, you know, this ability to use the Stormlight and this return of the Radiance, I think it's a symbol showing that we all have a spark of divinity within us, this free will and this ability to, you know, pursue our means throughout this life in a way that we see fit, but to remember that we have this piece of divinity that we carry around. And Szeth has, in a way, in a sense, denied this. He said, no, the Radiance have not returned. I have this ability, but it's not of something more divine. And then we see that in his objection of that, in his willingness to ignore that fact, his abilities are being used for worldly means. He's being used in another way, in a less just way, in an immoral way. And Kaladin, on the other hand, is giving us the contrast to that, where he is using his divinity for good. He is accepting that he is part of a greater whole, and he is trying to make the most out of his abilities to bring about justice and honor. And so the two of them together, we finally get, in a physical sense, this collision where they're fighting, and then we get, in a metaphorical sense, a very clear depiction of how they are mirror images of each other at this point in the story. And so I'm sure we'll see more of Szeth soon. And to wrap this up, to wrap up part 2, we of course still have the Parshendi and some interesting things with them going on in the background. Still somewhat ambiguous how they operate and this form shifting that they you know, undergo. But we see that there's something new that they're working on, and they're working on taking on a form that's going to allow them to influence the high storms. And so that's clearly going to play a significant role later in the story. And we have yet to see if there will be a meeting of the minds, so to speak, between the Parshendi and the Alethi. It's been foreshadowed at this point several times. We've also yet to see how Adolin will receive Shallan, and how Shallan will receive Adolin. But while Szeth is a mirror image of Kaladin in many ways, Adolin and Kaladin are running in a more parallel fashion. They have a lot of similarities, and it's been mentioned to Kaladin before, and Kaladin tries to shrug it off and say, no, I'm nothing like Adolin. But we can see that they both are very hardworking, and they both are concerned with doing what's right for the kingdom. So we'll see their relationship continue to grow as well as we move forward in the story. So I'll be moving on to part 3 in the next video on the Stormlight Archives. And if you have any thoughts about part 2, anything I didn't cover, any questions or anything you'd like to add, then please let me know, and I'll see you in the next video.